So a quick recap of where we've been so that we can kind of understand the significance of the theory that we're going to talk about today. So before exam 1, we really had mainly talked about trait theories, behavior theories, power, motivation, right? Some big things there. I want us to kind of recap a little bit motivation because today we're going to see a lot of it tied back in. What is motivation? What's the basic definition of it? Why we do what we do. Exactly. Right? And so it's not that people lack it. We just have different reasons for why we do the things that we do. And even though we have a bunch of different theories about motivation, we can really boil it down to 2 concepts. And it's like 2 types of motivation people have. What are those 2 types? Intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation tells us that people will do things simply because they're internally motivated to do it. They care about it. It's something that's important to them. Doesn't matter what other people think about it. They're going to do it just simply because they want to. They think it's fun. They think it's important. Extrinsic motivation, on the other hand, tells us that people will do things if you give them some type of external reward or motivation or incentive to do that particular thing. Which is better in the short term? Which is going to make people motivated in the short term? Extrinsic, exactly. But which one is going to keep people motivated in the long term? Intrinsic. Now, we also talked about another little area of motivation called locus of control. And locus of control is this idea of like, how in control do people think they are of the situations around them and what happens to them? If people have an internal locus of control, how would you describe them? Much better at jobs. They tend to be more motivated themselves. And it's because they kind of think they're the masters of their own fate, right? Like they believe, again, it goes into this idea of expectancy theory, where they believe if they do certain actions, they can expect to get the result they want. So if we tell them, if you do A plus B, you'll get C, then they're going to do A plus B because they expect to get C. They take responsibility for their actions. They believe that their choices have led to perhaps the things that have happened to them. A person with an external locus of control, how would we describe them?
They think that like everything just kind of happens for a reason. Outside factors will like influence the outcome.
Yeah. Everything is happening to them, not because of them, right? And so they think a lot of stuff is up to fate. A lot of stuff is because of luck. They just get a bad hand dealt to them, right? And so it's always these external things that are causing things to happen versus their actions. So it's important for us to have kind of these 2 big concepts about motivation in mind when we talk about our theory today with path goal. And to remind ourselves kind of where we're at, if you were drawing your concept map, we're in a new section of theories. These theories are called the situational approach. So this is really our first set of theories that is starting to say, maybe the leadership process, this interaction that happens, isn't all about the leader. We have completely been focusing on the leader up to this point, but nope, in the situational approach, we're going to start looking at some other things. We're going to look at the whole process, not just the leader as a person. And so the first kind of situational approach theory that we talked about was LMX, or leader-member exchange. And we talked about how important relationships are and that it really sets the groundwork for a lot of these situational approaches because it makes us emphasize that relationship a lot more, that dyadic relationship. And we said that whether that relationship is good or bad or high quality or low quality is going to determine if followers feel like they're a part of in-groups or out-groups. And there's repercussions to that, right? People that feel a part of the in-group, they're motivated. They're excited to be at work. You don't have to they just are intrinsically motivated. But people who feel like they're a part of the out-group, they aren't motivated at all, right, to be at work. They don't feel like people care. They're not going to work hard. That's why we see a lot of turnover in jobs, because people feel like they're a part of the out-group. Then on Tuesday, we talked about the situational leadership model. And this model was the first one that really said, beyond just looking at behaviors, so that task and relationship orientation of leaders, we need to look at who our followers are as well. So it was one of the first ones that really opened that door to say, leadership's more than just looking at the leader, let's start looking at the follower. So we start adding this additional contingency to what we're doing. And we looked at follower development. What were the two things that we try to pinpoint about our followers when we use the situational leadership model? Competence and commitment. All right? And so then as a leader, if we know the competence and commitment of our followers, we should be able to figure out what style of leadership, so how task and how relationship oriented we should be in order to be the most effective leader for them. Path goal theory, what we're talking about today, does something similar, saying that there's some different styles that leaders can use. It looks at followers. We are going to describe followers in a certain way to say, okay, what style do we need to have based on who our followers are? But we're going to add a third piece to the puzzle. What haven't we talked about yet that probably involves the leadership process? We have leaders, we have followers. What's been missing? It was kind of one of our criticisms of the situational leadership model. We said it's called situational leadership model, and yet it doesn't talk at all about what? The situation. So now path goal theory is going to start to try to add a third piece to this puzzle. And it calls the situation or the context task characteristics. So it's still not getting the full picture of like everything in a situation. But what it is doing is it's getting us to start thinking about other pieces of the puzzle. And it at least attaches to one, and that is, what are you asking people to do? What is the task at hand? So path goal theory. It centers on how leaders motivate followers. So this is another fascinating piece about this theory. It's really one of the first ones that explicitly ties in motivation theory to what the leader is doing. So it's not like situational leadership model in that it's trying to be prescriptive and matching, right? Situational leadership model said, you can figure out who your follower is, and I can prescribe what type of leader you need to be effective. It's not doing that here. It's saying, I can tell you what type of leader you need to be that's going to best motivate your follower. So it's definitely coming from a different place. It's not coming from a task and relationship orientation type of style. It's coming from a motivation style. So we're looking at the leader style, characteristics of followers, and the work setting or task characteristics. And ultimately, the goal of this, and the reason why we want to look at motivation, again, this is very much from a business or organization standpoint, is that as a leader, we hope to enhance employee performance and satisfaction. So if we think back to what we've talked about a lot with the other theories, a lot of it has been about, like when we look at the outcomes of leadership and why we need effective leadership, we have talked a lot about just how to make sure our employees are productive, right? But is that all there is to life? Like, do you want to go to your job and just be productive? I mean, it's good to be productive, right? But you want to be happy. You want to be satisfied with what you're doing. And so we're hoping that by taking on more of a motivation stance, we can improve that satisfaction. Because again, from motivation, we know there's a connection. The more intrinsically motivated people can be at their jobs, the more satisfied they're going to be. Okay? So, expectancy theory. We've heard this before. Where did we hear expectancy theory before?
The locus of control.
Locus of control for internally controlled people. People who have an internal locus of control. Again, expectancy theory is this idea: if I do A, I expect to receive C or B. Or if I do A plus B, I expect to receive C. And so the motivation principles here go along with that as well. We are approaching our followers as leaders in this model, saying that most people, if they come to work, if they work hard, they expect to be satisfied with their job. They expect to be able to accomplish whatever their task is. They expect to get the raise that the company says they'll get, right? And so expectancy theory is underlying a lot of this, and that's why motivation theory is being used as a part of Path Goal. Here's what we know, is that leadership generates motivation. Can y'all think of a time when, because of someone who was leading you, you became more motivated? Anyone want to share your example, what you're thinking of? I think about my high school basketball coach when I think of this. With leadership generating motivation. Our team, my junior year, man, it was a hard year, but we played hard. And we made it to state playoffs, but we were tired. And you know, we had been around each other a lot for a couple months, and so there started to be bickering, things like that, you know? And it just, everybody was kind of at the point that, like, even though we were excited to go to the playoffs, we were kind of tired of each other at the same time too. But my coach was so motivating. She stepped in. She made sure she was talking with all of us one-on-one. We would have team meetings every practice. And I just remember there kind of being this like switch that got turned on about a week and a half before state playoffs, when all of a sudden all of that other junk went to the wayside and we were all motivated to play in the state playoffs. Like, I don't think I've ever had a leader that motivated me that much as Coach Akins did. Any of y'all think of a similar situation in your life? Again, where somebody you considered to be a leader highly motivated you. What was it that they did?
I would say my art teacher, because everything that I was doing and that I wanted to achieve, he had already done. And he left me for who I was, despite whether or not I was successful.
Oh, I like that. So your value to that person also wasn't tied to the outcome necessarily. I like that. Any other examples? Well, even if you don't say it out loud, kind of be thinking of something. I think we've all had those instances where somebody's motivated us to do something. What we know is that when leaders are thinking about motivation and working with others, the payoff, so those things that our followers are expecting to receive, so whether it's doing well in a contest through FFA or if it's going to state playoffs in basketball, those payoffs actually increase. So not only are you helping your followers get what they expect, you're probably actually helping them get more than what they expected. And here's the thing, that goal or the path to that goal, whatever it is they're trying to get or they expect to get, as a leader, you're helping make that a lot clearer, a lot easier. So you're clearing that path. And that involves coaching and direction. And it also requires us removing obstacles. So I think back again to my basketball team, and what was an obstacle that was in our way from competing at state playoffs? The bickering and fighting on the team. Well, my coach at that point in time made it a point to talk with us one-on-one pretty consistently. And she really worked diligently to help us come back together as a team and work through those problems. She helped remove some of those obstacles. Anybody else had a roadblock or an obstacle to like a goal you were trying to achieve where someone stepped in and kind of helped make it a little bit easier for you? I won't ask y'all to raise your hands on this, but you know, sometimes parents will say, like when you're in high school, maybe you don't have to work to be able to get good grades to graduate high school. Maybe that was your situation. Not having to work might have been an obstacle that your parents removed for you to make that path a little bit easier. In college, if you have a professor and your goal is to get a good grade in that class, what are some things the professor can do to remove obstacles to help you get a better grade in that class?
Office hours.
Having office hours, so where you can go and ask questions. What else? What would help you do better in a class? That would be an easy thing for a professor to do.
Like a course schedule, so like you know what's coming up.
Yeah. Having a very clear course schedule and syllabus that is followed, right? You're not having to guess when things are due, because that's just taking up extra brain space, right? Making it a little bit harder to stay on track in that class. What about reviewing before exams? Or if they don't have time in class to review, giving you a review sheet. One little thing. What about going over exams afterwards so you know what mistakes you made so you don't have to make those mistakes again, right? There's little things people can do to remove obstacles that can make us achieve our goals a little bit easier. It's not that it's taking away what am I trying to say? Sometimes we have this connotation that if we make things easier for people, that means they don't have to work as hard. But we have to think about what is the real goal, and there's got to be a balance, right? We don't want people to have to overextend themselves just for the sake of overextending themselves. It's a little bit like hazing, right? There were parts of my PhD program that I felt like were just hazing. They were hard just because someone else had gone through it and it was hard, and they felt like it needed to continue to happen, right? And really, some of those things were just obstacles that if they had just simply been changed or shifted a little bit, same outcome would have worked the same amount of time, worked just as hard. It was just kind of unnecessary. And so leaders look at what are those obstacles and roadblocks that are keeping people from achieving their goals. Because ultimately, all of that together makes jobs more satisfying. So here is kind of a drawing of what describes path goal theory. On one side, you have your subordinates or your followers. On the other end, you have their goal or what it is they're wanting to accomplish. And of course, there's a path that happens there. And then you have those obstacles that come in the way. And so path goal leadership says that our job as a leader is to help our followers more clearly define the goals that it is they want to achieve. That way we can clarify the path for them, so we can help them kind of remove obstacles or avoid obstacles. And then we provide the support that we need. And there's different ways we do that based on the type of motivation that we use. What are your thoughts on path goals so far? Thumbs up if you're like, this is sounding kind of good, or thumbs down if you're like, I'm still not sure about this. It seems too simple. It's just it's a different approach of thinking about this. Sorry, I totally just treated y'all like kindergartens, and I won't do that again. I've been helping my kid with virtual school, and they have to do thumbs up, thumbs down. Sorry. I will not do that again.
We have to do that in one of my graduate classes on Zoom. So.
Do you really? Oh, bless. Okay, I really don't know why I just did that. So here are the major components. So when we think about that path, so we drew that path and it had the obstacles that happen. Ultimately, that's where we're providing support along the way. And that support is coming through the form of motivation. And so when we decide what type of motivation would we provide, we've got to think about who are our followers. So what are their characteristics? And what is it what's the task that they're having to do in order to achieve that goal? So we need to know a little bit more about the task. And all of those things together is going to tell us what type of style or motivation style. See some similar words here. Directive, supportive. We've used those before when we've talked about behavior theories and behavior styles. So directive sometimes is a little more focused on the task. Supportive is a little bit more focused on the follower. But we have two new ones here. We have this idea of a participative leader and an achievement-oriented leader. So it's an important difference to kind of make there. All right. Here's how it works. Very simple. So I kind of hate on this chart that they put the leadership behavior first, because we can't know the right leader behavior until we look at the follower and task. So let's look at those columns first. Follower characteristics. What you're also going to notice here is we're describing the follower a lot more beyond just their competence and their commitment level. If someone is dogmatic, what does that mean?
I'm assuming like dogs are really loyal, so like dogmatic means that you're like a loyal follower.
You're kind of close. I like that you use the word loyal. I've never thought about that before when describing dogmatic. I always say hard-headed.
Oh, okay.
But they're loyal to their beliefs, okay? Loyal to their beliefs. We don't talk about politics in this class, but when you meet somebody that's like hardcore about their politics, that person's usually pretty dogmatic, okay? That means that whatever they believe, whatever they think is right and wrong, that's it. You are not going to change their mind. A little hard-headed, okay? Authoritarian. How can a follower be authoritarian? Any of y'all ever, you consider yourself as a leader to be maybe a little bit more relational? Again, thinking back to Blake and Mouton, you're like, I'm definitely the country club leader. But then you have followers or people who are working with you that are like, I need you to tell me step by step what to do. Or maybe you're that follower, right? Then when you work with someone who's so relationship oriented, you're like, I need structure. I need to know exactly what we're accomplishing. I need to know the dates stuff are due, That would be an authoritarian follower. And so they're kind of begging for a leader to be more task oriented with them. So we have a follower, if we were to describe them that way, and then the task that they're being asked to do is ambiguous. Maybe doesn't have that structure, right? It's unclear. There's complexity to it, but we don't really know where to start. Can you see how the task itself could be an obstacle for this type of follower? If they're dogmatic, if they're authoritarian, if they like that clarity, they have a belief about how things should be done, but yet they're being asked to do something that has no structure at all, that could be an obstacle, right? What that tells us is when we know that's happening with our followers, as a leader, we should be more of a directive leader. So we're providing guidance and we're motivating them by adding some psychological structure. What might psychological structure look like?
Would that be kind of like checking in to make sure that like mentally like they're doing good, like having those like making sure emotions are in check and like don't hinder productivity and stuff?
Absolutely. A lot of times as a leader, this just means providing structure where you can provide structure, because you might not be able to change the task for them. But what you can do is you could have weekly meetings with them, check-in meetings. And so maybe you're not able to change the task, but they just need somebody to talk through what's going on with. You're helping them set boundaries because they like boundaries. And so figuring out where they can set those boundaries. And so in doing that, you're providing a type of motivation for them where they still think that they can get the outcome that they expect to get. And you're helping them clear up that obstacle so that they can see how the task is actually doable for themselves. You can see how supportive, participative. I want to jump down to achievement-oriented, since that's almost a little bit different here. Our follower, instead of being dogmatic and authoritarian, is someone who has really high expectations and the need to excel. If you look above at participative and supportive, those rows, and the follower characteristics, we also see sometimes followers might need affiliation, need control. What motivation theory does that remind you of? No, it's one of our 5 main motivation theories we talked about. It's in the words: need affiliation, need control, need of power, need of affiliation, need of achievement. Those are the acquired needs theory, right? So you see how we're starting to think beyond just basic, even intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, but we're pulling in these other ideas of motivation. And so it's changing how we react to our followers. So if we have someone that has a need to excel, I would call that need for achievement. They want to accomplish things. They have high expectations, but they're given that same type of task. Ambiguous, it's challenging, it's complex. How does an achievement-oriented leader help out in this situation? They provide challenges. Why might a follower who has high expectations and a need to achieve need challenges? So they don't get bored. So a lot of times we think of the word challenge as an obstacle, but for this particular type of follower, not having obstacles is an obstacle, okay? Because you don't ever feel like you're achieving anything. And so as a leader, you can think of, how can I do this? So I always think about this with like those students that I have that do have that high expectation, that need to excel. And so like they're always working so hard in my class and they're doing everything. I might give those students a little bit more to do. Not because I think any better of them, but because they want to feel like, well, I'm learning a little bit more in this class. And they are seeking out that challenge to do so. It's that differential instruction that we sometimes have, right? And that happens all throughout grade school, right? Sometimes that's why maybe we have gifted and talented programs in school, because a lot of times those students are already exhibiting this kind of need for achievement, and so having something a little bit extra helps them stay motivated to be in school. Because if you don't, they're going to become bored, right? It's not necessarily that they're smarter, it's that they just have a different type of motivation. Something to think about. So what do y'all think about this? Do you think this is more accurately catching a little bit the process of leadership? Okay. So we're not going to go through real in depth all the different styles and things, because again, y'all have this in the PowerPoint slides that are online. You've read about it in the book, but it gives you some more specifics about these leader behaviors. So the 4 styles and what they look like. And what I like about path goal theory is that some of these things that it says are like very specific, and they feel a little bit more doable. So again, if I figure out that I need to be more of a directive leader for my follower, I can help people set timelines. That is something that I can take as a recommendation and do. I'm not having to figure out how to be more task oriented. I'm not figuring out how to be more supportive or relationship oriented. I can set clear standards of performance. I can clear up rules and regulations. Like, those are very doable things for me. And so they give kind of these same recommendations for all types of styles, just very specific things you can take as a leader and implement to help your followers. Some things to think about. So when we looked at that chart and we looked at follower characteristics, we had things like need to achieve or need to control, need for affiliation, whether they were dogmatic or authoritarian. And so there are some specific like check boxes that we can kind of look at with followers. So similar to saying, is a follower committed or not committed, competent or not competent, there are some areas we can look at. For instance, the first kind of thing we can try to describe about our follower is, what is their need for affiliation? And so if they show a strong need for affiliation, here's something that helps them. What is the psychological structure they like? So do they like, again, a lot of boundaries set? Do they like a lot of clear rules, a lot of structure? Or do they like more go with the flow? Do they kind of live their life a lot in the gray area of things? And so you can figure out how to help them. What's their desire for control? Here we see a direct connection back to internal and external locus of control. Someone, if you can look at your follower and say it's very obvious that they have an internal locus of control, then you could see where they might prefer a leader who's more participative. A person who feels like they're in control of their destiny, do they necessarily want to be told what to do all the time? They want to be playing a part in it. So that's where participative is usually preferred. But if they have an external locus of control, directive's probably better because they want to kind of be told what to do, to have those boundaries set for them, right? Because they feel like those boundaries are what's deciding what's going to happen to them. And then here's another thing that's pretty unique to this theory. We, for the first time, are actually carrying what the followers think. So not just is it what we think the task is that they're trying to do, we want to know, do followers even think that they're able to accomplish this task on themselves? So a little bit is about their motivation and about their self-confidence. And so why do y'all think it's important to consider follower self-confidence or self-efficacy?
Usually people who are feeling confident about what they're doing tend to like perform well and achieve their goals better.
Can we treat people the same if they have different levels of confidence in what they're doing? I don't know. It's hard as a leader because it's going to take different types of motivation based on that self-confidence and self-efficacy. Task components. So the specific things we want to look at when describing that task is exactly how it's designed. What is the formal system it resides in? And then what's the primary work of those groups of followers? So are they going to be working with other people, or are they going to be doing it by themselves? All those different things, okay? So again, we look back, this looks like a very simple model, but as you can see, there's also like small components that we're considering when it comes to defining the goals, clarifying the path, because we're really looking at who are our followers, and we're looking at them more in depth, and we're now looking at the task and trying to describe the task more in depth to have those 4 types. So what I would like for us to do now, Erin's going to help pass out to you a sheet. Are y'all okay in working in pairs today? Would that be all right? I'd like for y'all to pick a partner, and once you've kind of identified who your partner is, I'll give you directions on what to do next. We're going to kind of work through this case study. Y'all are going to be creating a case study yourself. So, I've provided y'all a couple different case studies so far this semester, but this is going to be one that you're going to get to connect the theory back to something you've specifically done, an experience you've had. And we're going to walk through this together. So what I'd like for you to do is I'm going to kind of give y'all a prompt. You're going to talk about it in your group, decide on something, and then we'll go to the next question together as a class. So we're going to kind of all work on this case study at the same pace. In your pairs, the very first thing I want for you to do is I want you to talk about a specific leadership experience you've had in the past where you've had to accomplish something. So a lot of times I've had people talk about, I served as an FFA officer and we had to plan our chapter banquet. That would be a leadership role with something you had to accomplish. For others, it's been something similar to, I've been on a sports team and we were wanting to win this particular game. Student government. Maybe you're sitting here thinking, I never served on an officer position. I wasn't a leader. What other areas of life can we be leaders? With your family, right? But maybe you're just I can't come up with something, but you can maybe think of a friend's example. You can do that as well. But the very first thing I want you to do is talk about your experiences and choose one of them between the two of you. Choose one experience that you want to go with, and to answer question 1. What was that experience, and then what was that goal or that project that you were working on? Let's take 5 minutes to talk about that and come up with something in your pair.
So between the pair, just one example.
One example for the pair. Trying to decide the best slide. That would be the best one. Sorry. Sorry, guys.
And also when you sit over there, sometimes when you sway, you go behind the computer and it just starts flipping out.
Oh, yeah, because it's missing them. I used to be really bad about that. In the other classroom I taught, especially writing on the board, I forget that when my back turns.
Yeah.
And so the swivel would just start spinning. Yeah.
Luckily, this one, it kind of wants to stay in that general area, but it'll kind of like drift away. I'm like, no, what do I do?
Sorry. Okay, what situation did y'all come up with?
We're going to be like,
Oh, I like that. Okay. So again, just focus on working on question 1. You don't have to work ahead. I'll explain what to do next. Y'all pick a situation. What's your situation?
My internship with the Teacher Academy in ACL.
Fabulous. Okay, everybody got a situation? Okay, so now what I would like for you to do in your groups, question 2. I want y'all to try to describe the task characteristics. So whatever that goal or project was that you identified in your experience, how would you describe the characteristics of that goal or project? So I've put this slide back up here, and I want to kind of say to you here, these aren't the only task characteristics. You've got to think about the opposites, right? So here it says unclear and ambiguous. Maybe your task wasn't unclear. It wasn't ambiguous. So how would you describe your task on the opposite end of that? Clear and defined. Okay? So these are kind of one set of task characteristics. Yours might be the other, but these are just, I'm putting these up here so you can kind of, if you need some ideas or reference of like how to describe the task, there's some terms you can use, but you can also use the opposing terms as well. So take a couple minutes and describe the task. I think for the sake of this, I would try to focus on one specific project or thing. Just to,
Thank you.
yeah, no problem. Good clarification. It's okay. I call my son that a lot. So I'm like, that's one of my favorite words right now. Everybody feel good with describing task characteristics? Okay. So next we're going to go to question 3. You can keep working on task if you need to, but with follower characteristics. Again, the things you want to look for is if you're describing the followers, or maybe it was the people working with you. Maybe you were a follower in this situation, right? So you're part of an officer team, but you weren't the president or you weren't the ag teacher. How would you describe those follower characteristics? What was there? Where were they when it came to wanting affiliation? What type of psychological structure did they want? How would you describe their locus of control? And then how would you describe their self-efficacy or their perception of their own ability? So those are kind of the 4 things to be thinking about as you try to describe the follower characteristics.
Can you go back to the first slide?
I can. So what's their need for affiliation? And what type of structure did they want? Are you working by yourself? But you're working through? Okay. I feel like an old lady. I want a broomstick to like hit the ceiling back. Stop it!
Can you go to the fourth one?
I sure can. Yeah, because locus of control is pretty straightforward. The 4th one is, again, like, what is their perception of their own ability?
That reminds me of the first apartment I ever lived in Knoxville. The people that lived above me would vacuum every night at 2 a.m. Every single night.
Maybe they had a Roomba.
I don't know. I was like, it's either an OCD thing or it's like you have to vacuum at this specific time, which is a really annoying time to
That
vacuum.
or she got home at 2 a.m.
True.
Because whenever I used to get home, like when I get home from work, like I'm still in stuff on like Red Bull and stuff, so like I'll go home and clean because I'm not tired.
Do you vacuum though?
Yeah. So like I clean. Like, I
Neighbors hate you. I was the neighbor that hated neighbors like you. I was like, what are they doing?
no, because you like get home and you're like, well, I don't want to like sit there and like stay up for hours and not do anything. I would go home and clean.
That's
You
true.
do quiet activities like desk work.
Like desk work. Okay. So now with number 4, if you're still working on followers, that's good. But number 4 is now you kind of taking that perspective and thinking about the obstacles that were getting in the way of achieving the goal or completing the project. So what were some of the obstacles, the challenges, the tough people, the struggle? What are some things that happened during this experience?
Does that make sense?
Say that again?
Self-doubt. That would definitely be an obstacle. Yeah? I like it. don't know. Every time I think of this, I think of planning my senior banquet for FFA. There's so much drama with it. Just
Mine
like,
was similar. When I was a freshman in college, I was the secretary of KD, or like my KD chapter, and I had to do the senior send-off. And oh boy, I did not know anything because I was a freshman, never, gone through one before, like gone through one, and oh Lord, that was
just had no idea what you were getting into.
there was so much. Just in general, I would say every story is a hot mess in a special way.
Been there, done that. Yes.
It's like you don't realize it until you're like in an officer position and there's money and drama.
Yes. And so if you've worked through identifying obstacles, now I want you to be specific. Who was the leader for the goal or project? And so that may be something that you've been trying to figure out, that you're like, well, this is something I was a part of, but I'm not really sure I was in charge of it. I was maybe the person being asked to do it. Then you would have been the follower in that situation. And so who was the leader? Maybe in your situation, you were. You were the person ultimately responsible for this particular thing happening. Okay? Gets a little hazy because sometimes who we consider to be the leader isn't really the one doing the work. That's where it can be problematic.
What if there's a tier of leaders?
Describe that, just so you have a clear idea of how that's working. Because maybe you reported to somebody, so they were your leader, but then you were in charge of another group of people. That could be the case too. And so in some of this, when you're thinking about it, you're playing both the leader and the follower role. Okay. So now that we've thought through the characteristics of the task, characteristics of the followers, we at least maybe have a clearer picture of who was the leader, who were the followers in this situation. Flip on to the back, and I want you to focus on answering number 1, based on the scenario that you've just created. So y'all have just created together a case study. Everything we need to know to try to decide what's the most effective leader style we should use. I don't want y'all to think about yet what was done, but just based on what you've written out, the characteristics of the task, the characteristics of the followers, what would be the most effective leader style to implement to motivate the followers so that you achieve the desired goal or accomplish the project that you set out to do? Based on what you've described, what would be the most effective, or what would have been the most effective? Ideally, yes. So if you're in that situation where maybe you were playing both leader and follower, decide which role you're going to be and focus on that part. What are you using as your situation?
I'm using a work task. Easy to describe. I have someone who's already a leader, so I don't have to worry about trying to define who in the situation would be the leader.
Perfect.
And plus, it's encountered almost every day. So.
Yeah, so lots of experience with it. Good, then that should make this very easy to kind of walk through. All right, everybody decided on the appropriate leader style? Question 2 now is the fun part. So you've decided, you don't necessarily have to answer why this would be best. Y'all probably talked about that as you decided what leader style would be best. But now you get to say, all right, was this the leader style that was used? Was it a match? Like, now that you have learned how to look through these different characteristics and identify what's going on, did the leader use the appropriate type of motivation style to help the followers achieve the task or accomplish the project? If not, what did they use and why was it a mismatch now that you're looking back? Or if it is a match, what was the outcome? And like, how can you show that that motivation style of leader worked? So talk about that in your groups. What was the situation y'all used?
My senior year as president in FFA, like playing the FFA banquet. And like we kind of identified my advisor as like the main leader, just because he was like the one kind of guiding us. But we chose directive, and I think it does like describe how that situation was, just because in the end, everything he provided as far as like the guidance and the psychological help helped us plan like a banquet we were proud of our senior year. And something that we were really proud of for our parents. But we were talking about how like there was 8 high school kids like on a team, and we weren't really cohesive. So had it not been for our advisor, maybe like it would have been a mess. So
Yeah. So almost kind of like the obstacle that they removed was like being consistent and having that stability to the team that you maybe wouldn't have had otherwise. It's a really good point. I like that.
This was my math for chemistry last night. My tears dried on my
Don't be dramatic. My tears dried on the page.
Well, I wish Keystone would have been harder on me to take chemistry my first year of college rather than my third year of college, because I kept putting it off, and now it's like things that I learned in high school, but I'm having to reteach myself.
Science and math, 2 things to never put off. Always continue.
Yeah, I totally took them off.
Hey, are you in video yet, Allison?
No, because I got kicked out of the photography course because COVID, and they were like, well, we're only going to let seniors in it right now. So I got kicked out.
Okay,
I need to see if I can get in there and screen. Oh, I actually was going to send him an email today.
I was just sending you because I have mine, I have like 3 minor shots, so I need to like figure out planning.
Yeah. Well, you graduated in 4 years. There's a chance I could graduate a semester early.
There's a chance I could have graduated this year, not like no.
Oh, heck no.
Senior year though, we're taking English class.
Okay.
That's subject, I will not take it for your senior year.
Well, it's only available in the fall.
Perfect.
All right. Everybody kind of finished answering the questions and working through your case study? I would like to hear from a group first that you felt like the leader style that was used in your situation matched with what your diagnosis said it should have been. Kind of walk us through what your scenario is, how you describe the task and followers, and then what was that matching leader style that was used. You said that this one should be used, and that's exactly what happened. Will someone share that for me? Do you mind sharing yours? Okay.
So I talked about my senior year planning on the FFA chapter banquet. I was president, but we identified the FFA advisor as the ultimate leader because obviously he has like control over that. Some of the stuff we didn't. We said that our past characteristics were we had strong formal authority and that they were clear and defined. Just because he was still there for that authority and we knew what we were supposed to do to get things done. And then one of our obstacles was the fact that the officer team was helping plan it, and we were 8 high school kids who all had very different ideas, so cohesion wasn't always the forefront. So our advisor, I think, needed to have the directive type behavior to help provide the guidance and psychological structure for us. And in the end, I do feel like he provided that because we were able to produce a banquet that we were really proud of. We had a lot of pride in to present to our community. But had it not been for our advisor being the ultimate leader in that, I just don't think it would have come together as clean with so many different ideas going around. So he was kind of the pillar that kept the cohesion amongst us and giving us that leadership opportunity.
I like that. It's a good example. They were able to, based on their task descriptions, based on their descriptions of the followers, say, leader should have been directive in this situation. And when they looked back, that's exactly what happened. Their FFA advisor provided that directive leadership to keep everybody motivated so that they could accomplish the task, which was putting together the FFA banquet. Now let me have a group. Anybody have it maybe where the task or the style didn't match up? So based off of what you've described about the project now, you maybe said this type of leadership style should have been used, but that is not what happened. Any group? Nobody? All of y'all matched up? Everybody matched? Okay. It's very rare that that happens. So maybe not thinking off then the specific case study we've worked through, but can you maybe think back to a time in your life now where you look back and you're like, maybe you yourself as a leader approached your followers in this situation in a certain style, and now you realize maybe why it didn't work out so well? Erin shaking her head yes. Erin, share.
Okay, so student teaching, starting out, you're in college for 4 years, so you get used to college and kind of those standards, and then you realize these are high schoolers, and I came in like trying to do a lot more, I guess just less directive and more like student-led activities starting out, and then I realized my students do not need that. They cannot handle themselves, and it was my freshman class. It was my agri-science freshman class. They are freshmen, they cannot handle themselves. They need direction for every little thing in their life, which is kind of sad because in teaching theory, you're always told, have your students do everything. These kids couldn't handle it. So yeah, I learned very quickly that I needed to like manage their lives.
Yeah. We see that a lot too in like your college classes. If you think back to some of like your freshman, sophomore classes, you were not only given a very clear syllabus, but oftentimes every assignment you had an exact rubric with it, with exact directions. And then maybe your junior, senior level classes, that doesn't happen so much anymore. You're told to write a paper, 2 pages, and you're like, how many paragraphs? How many sentences? Well, how does it need to be formatted? What do I need to, and again, these are like questions that I've gotten used to, but it's that starting to develop a sense of being okay with ambiguity and some of that. And so you realize if I were to provide a senior level type assignment to a freshman in college, it'd be really hard because they're looking for that structure. So that's a really good example. Anything else y'all can think of in your life where maybe those styles didn't match up to what you think needed to be used? Bailey.
My dream was to have a town Christmas tree lighting ceremony, and so it happened. But a lot of the time I'm a very supportive leader, and so I wanted to start it really big, and everyone was willing to because they wanted to be affiliated with how like cool it was and make it a tradition in our town. But ultimately at the end of it, I had to do everything because I wasn't directive enough. Like I was the one who had to unstring all the lights and call everyone for the baked goods and do everything. And then when we actually had it, I was the one who did all of it, and they did all their parts, and they're like, we're just so proud to have done all of this, and I'm like, I did everything. So it's like, I think there has to be times when you have to like take yourself out of the situation.
Right, because maybe it wasn't that they weren't capable of helping you do those things, but to them, to the followers' perception of what they were being asked to do, it was very ambiguous. They didn't know exactly all the things that needed to happen. And so that communication or understanding of the task hadn't really been talked about between y'all. And so because of that, you applied a type of leadership style that wasn't really needed at the point. That's a really good example. Any others you can think of?
I can think of like a specific example, but oftentimes like maybe like in a group project for like a class or something, like I always just assume that I oftentimes assume that everyone understands at the same level that I do. So like I have like high expectations of other members, but because of that like lack of communication or not like clear details about like tasks that the group needs to do, like things don't get done.
Right. So I told y'all when we talked about LMX that this idea of dyadic relationships is going to come down and throughout a lot of what we continue to talk about. I've heard a lot here of kind of this miscommunication between the leader and follower, or misunderstanding. What would help solve that? Communication, but communication happens when we have high quality relationships, right? And so taking that time to develop high quality relationships with the people we work with can help us understand their perception of a task. It can help us better diagnose those characteristics of them as a follower so that we're getting a more accurate picture of what's going on. So we know how to remove those obstacles to help them achieve their goal. So path goal theory, there seems to be a lot. It's one of those that there's a lot of pieces, but at the same time, it's pretty simplistic, right? We get to know these things so that we can remove obstacles. Like that's our job as a leader, according to path goal theory. If we are a path goal leader, we are making the path clearer for our followers to achieve their goals by removing these obstacles. Some strengths. Unlike situational leadership model, which sounds good, but is not really a theory because we don't have a whole lot of evidence to it. There is a theoretical framework for path goal theory, and we're able to test it. We're able to see it happen. Can we measure people's motivation? Yes, because we've studied motivation a lot. So because this theory is rooted in expectancy theory, and it ties in locus of control, it talks about giving rewards to help provide motivation. So a little bit of extrinsic. We can actually test, do those things work to help followers achieve their goals? So it's testable. We like that it integrates motivation. Why do you think that's a positive piece of this theory? So rather than just looking at task and relationship orientation, what's the good thing about including motivation in a leadership theory?
It incorporates like the why.
Incorporates the why. So, we said the difference between behavior theories and situational theories is that behavior looks at what leaders do. Situational theories look at how leaders act. Motivation helps us get to that how because we're understanding the why. Why followers do the things they do, and as leaders we can respond to that because we have power, right? There's forms of power that we're always using. So those two things are connected, and it's practical. Even though there seems to be a lot of pieces to it, it's practical in that if we simply go with that concept of removing obstacles, providing rewards when needed to help people achieve their goals, it's pretty simple. There are things we can do that are really simplistic to help people be more motivated in their jobs or at the task at hand. Criticisms, it can be a little confusing when you really do start looking at all those individual pieces. Partial support, it's a criticism, but I would say that's a criticism for all research, right? And that's why we continue to research things. This is an interesting one that we haven't seen brought up as a criticism in other theories. The theory doesn't account for gender differences in how leadership is enacted and perceived. Why in the world is this included as a criticism of the theory?
like nurturing, and that's kind of like a stereotype of women, of like, we're always nurturing.
We have very cultural laden perspectives on gender roles and how those behaviors look and are perceived. And so if we describe supporting as nurturing, we're going to assume that that's automatically the best leadership style for women. So what happens, because again in our culture we connect nurturing with feminine, why then if a woman actually says, no, I need to be directive here, how might that be perceived in our culture? Overbearing. I get called being a mom, right? Like, stop momming me. That can be hard, right? But then at the same time too, if we have a male who, again, in our culture, being directive is seen as a part of masculinity, then if they are nurturing as or supporting as a leader, what are sometimes the perceptions of that? They're being too soft. Or it's weird. Why, you know? So again, we haven't accounted for that culturally there are those gender norms, and this is in any culture. Any culture has gender norms. And we just haven't accounted for, again, that perception. Because we are starting to move towards thinking about how followers perceive things, this theory doesn't go far enough to say, well, even though the leader says this is the appropriate type of style to use, we haven't really thought about what's the follower's perception of that particular style. And then to Allison's point about communication, the theory does have this assumption that it's making that everyone just knows how to communicate well and that it's happening. And we're not really sure about that because is everyone good at communication? No, not all the time. So some things to think about. And the reason why these criticisms are helpful for us to talk about is because that then helps us understand why we're continuing to do research in these areas. No theory is perfect. There's some good things and there's some bad things, and so it's important that we talk about those. Which theory do y'all like better? Situational leadership model or Pascal theory? If you were having to vote today,
Situational.
why do you like situational?
That was one lot on Tuesday, right?
Yep. You are correct.
I was just trying to make sure. Just because I think it's more simple. This one, I don't know. I just feel like it doesn't give as well as a simple explanation as situational.
Mm-hmm. You like that prescriptive
Like,
part.
well, it's just easy to understand. This one has, yes, I'm glad that it has moving parts, but I think if someone that was new to leadership, they should probably use situational first, and then if they want to go a little deeper, then use Pascal.
I like that. Anybody vote for Pascal? It's taken me a long time to come around to Pascal. I'll admit that. I would vote today for Pascal, but
It's just, I don't know.
it's also my nature. I like boundaries. I tend to be more of that person that's a little bit authoritarian. I'm the follower you're going to work with that's like, what's our deadline? What's our stuff? And so I'm kind of there. I can always revert back to situational leadership just because I like that prescriptive nature of it. But there's something too. The more I've taught, the more I see how important Pascal is. And I mean, it's something I take into account with my teaching a lot of like, is what I'm asking my students to do creating an obstacle for them or making learning easier for them? Sometimes we do things in education that is it sounds good, but it is creating obstacles for students to learn. Standardized testing.
And then I took that ACT 9 times.
Yeah, because your focus becomes on the test and not on learning, right? Just a thing. But you know, again, that's something I just think about. Like, if I'm going to give y'all a quiz in class, is it really because I think it's important to the learning process? And there's a reason in the learning process that it exists? Or am I just giving it to give it? Speaking of quizzes, you do have a quiz that opens today. And I'll tell y'all, my purpose in this class for quizzes isn't it for it to be an obstacle. They're only worth 10 points each. the purpose of the quiz is to help you see, did I get out of reading and coming to class what I should have gotten out of? It's a personal review for yourself. We learn most oftentimes by seeing where our gaps are. And so it's more of kind of that reflective piece. It's important to learning. And so that's my purpose with there. I hope it doesn't feel like an obstacle to y'all. But it's due before class on Tuesday. It should open up right about now. Only thing that'll be on it will be path goal and situational leadership. Y'all can hang on to them. That could be something you go back and kind of use as y'all are reviewing for exams and thinking through examples yourself. See y'all Tuesday.